Hello and welcome to this special show on Rajya Sabha Television. I am Vishal Dahiya, and here we take a look at all the efforts being made in India to fight against COVID-19. Now, one of the very important aspects as far as COVID-19 pandemic and the battle against this particular virus is vaccine development. Now, there are several vaccine candidates which are being worked upon, more than 100. They're in various stages. Some are in preclinical stages, some are in the phase 1 of the trial. Some of them are all set to enter the phase 2 of clinical trial as well. One very important aspect when we talk about vaccine development is the ethics and science of vaccine development. And today we're going to talk about that only. For this, we have with us a very distinguished panel of guests. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Professor Eyal. He is the director of Center for Population Level Bioethics in Rutgers University in New Jersey, USA. Thank you, Professor Neer, for joining us. We also have with us Dr.Gagandeep Kang, the executive director of THSTI Faridabad, and Dr. Sanjay Mehendale is the Director Research at PD Hinduja Hospital and Medical Research Center, and he's also the former ADG of ICMR. So let's begin the show, and let me begin with you, Dr. Kang. Let's put the things in perspective first here. Vaccine development is not a new concept. We have had vaccines for a lot of diseases, but this time around it is quite very much in focus because of the severity of the COVID-19 pandemic. And therein comes the question of ethics and science of vaccine development. So what are the various contours of these ethics of vaccine development and the science behind it?
There are multiple aspects of vaccine development that are related to ethics. Essentially, when you want a vaccine that is safe first because it is given to healthy people. Then you want a vaccine that is efficacious, and that can only be determined by testing it in clinical trials. And third, you want a vaccine that is high quality and consistent, which means that the manufacturing processes that you have for the vaccines need to be very well defined. We should not be bringing any vaccine to market that does not fulfill all three of these parameters, and these need to be monitored over time. So when you think about testing of vaccines in phase 1, in phase 2, in phase 3, and even after licensure of the vaccine, we must monitor vaccine safety to make sure that it has no adverse events that are either common, which we already know, like redness or swelling at the site of injection. That is, it's a common adverse event. To something that is really rare, some viral vaccines have been associated with Guillain-Barré syndrome. So these are things that we need to monitor for all through the stages of vaccine development. For efficacy, we start to test efficacy of the vaccines usually in 2B or in 3. And then once the vaccine is licensed, we continue to see whether the vaccine is working. And those are called phase 4 or effectiveness studies.
Okay. One very important aspect, since you're talking about all the phases of vaccine development and to get the efficacy right, we need to keep on testing and ensuring that we're getting all the components right and the results also as per the desire. So one very important aspect, which has been in discussion for quite some time now, and all of you will be able to shed more light on that, is the human challenge. That's the human trials, something which we call clinical trials phase 1 or phase 2. Let me come to Professor Neer here. Professor Neer, let me begin with you. In terms of the entire discussion on the need for human challenge in the development of a vaccine.
The place that human challenge trials, which are an option for vaccine development, would fit is in the final stage, phase 3. To check efficacy of the vaccine. So the way that that's conventionally done is you give some people the vaccine, some people a control substance, maybe a placebo, and then they go back home and we wait. And the investigators wait to see if after a lot of them get exposed to the virus, you start seeing differences between the two groups, which would indicate that the vaccine works. In a human challenge trial, you don't wait. Everybody stays. It's a far smaller number of volunteers, over 100 times smaller, and they stay in the medical facility. They stay isolated there, and you actually expose them to the virus. You challenge them with the virus, all of them. So very soon thereafter, you don't need to wait for natural exposure to occur or not to occur or never to occur. Very soon thereafter, you know with certainty that there will be enough cases for you to come to a judgment on whether the vaccine works better than the control.
Okay.
It's obviously an ethically challenging notion. You give human subjects deliberately a virus that is deadly, but we should discuss. I think that there are ways to do that study in a tolerably safe way. For example, if you select for the study only people who are young and without conditions that make severe COVID disease likelier, if you provide them with therapeutics very early on upon any sign that they are sick, and in other safety measures within the trial. The advantage is this strategy is expedited, but there is a very live discussion in many countries as to whether we want to go in that route. WHO has a working group report on this, pretty much siding with conducting challenge trials of this disease. Oxford University announced that it will conduct challenge trials by the end of this year, and there are other discussions.
Okay. Dr. Sanjay, there are several experts, several professionals who have voiced their concern as far as human challenge is concerned and are against it as well. But this is, as Professor Neer is also pointing out, this is a really, really important step in ensuring that a full-fledged vaccine is developed. So how do we go about it? What are the pros and cons out here as per you?
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a real tough decision, because here, as Professor Neil rightly pointed out, this is under very controlled conditions that what we are achieving is trying to expose the individuals to the risk of the virus challenge, and then just try and assess how many of them in the two categories of those who have received the vaccine against those who have not actually tend to develop the disease. Mm-hmm. So what we are actually assessing to do is to assess the efficacy endpoint much faster than how we would be able to do that in the real life situation. But the issue here is, will those results that we get out of human challenge studies essentially be applicable to the real life situations? That's again a very tricky issue. We really do not know about it. The kind of dose and the virulence of the agent, which is so much controlled under the, say, studies which are doing human challenge, that may not be as controlled as in the natural circumstances in which a phase 3 clinical trial is conducted. And so ethically, the kind of risks that are involved in these two situations could be considered as kind of disproportionate by the people who are actually looking at these two different trial designs. And hence, clearly balancing out which one is the better is a difficult one. And what essentially then is the deciding factor here? We have to look at what is the urgency of having this particular vaccine in the current scenario. The number of cases that are happening all over globally is alarming, as we know. Also, the rate at which people are dying is also pretty high. And keeping that in mind, the kind of risks that are involved with human challenge studies, are they kind of commensurate or comparable, or are they worth taking when there is a serious urgency of bringing a vaccine, is an issue to be balanced out with the kind of risk that is involved for waiting for this particular vaccine to be tested out in the natural circumstances in the typical field trials, and then allowing certain people to die over that particular period of time. I think this is a huge dilemma which the scientific community has to sort out.
Okay. And since this is such a important aspect of vaccine development, but such a tricky one, Dr. Kang, there must be some guidelines which must have been put in place internationally, because we've been almost into more than 6 months into this particular pandemic globally. If we talk about more than that as well, and vaccine development is it's something. A human challenge study is not happening for the first time in COVID-19 pandemic. It must have happened in earlier vaccines which have been developed as well. So what are the guidelines here globally which are adhered to by all who work on vaccine development, specifically here in this case for COVID-19?
In a way, actually, human challenge studies have been around for over 100 years. They got a bad name because they were done without appropriate informed consent, particularly during the Second World War, but also subsequently. Since the late 1980s, early 1990s, human challenge studies have been a very important way of studying infectious diseases, not just for vaccine development. There are many challenge studies that have been set up in the US, for example, for noroviruses, where the studies have helped us to think about how to design a vaccine. In terms of the evaluation of vaccines, human challenge studies have become almost like a filtering mechanism for malaria vaccines. There have been over 150 different kinds of malaria vaccines. It's become almost accepted practice, not almost, it is accepted practice that all malaria vaccines will go through a human infection and challenge study before it is allowed to progress any further to field trials. So this is not something that is unfamiliar. We just have not done them in a systematic way in India. This is something that has been discussed, particularly in the last 2 years under the Indo-US Vaccine Action Program. And there is a lot of guidance that has been put out there. The FDA treats every challenge study as an investigational new drug. In the UK, you need to get your IRB permission, and if you're not testing a new vaccine, you actually don't need regulatory approval for these studies. In the case of COVID-19, all the regulators have discussed these studies, and most recently, WHO has come out with guidance that is on the ethics and on the practical aspects of what to consider in terms of clinical requirements, regulatory requirements for doing challenge studies for COVID-19. As Professor Eyal pointed out, the University of Oxford has decided that they are going to go ahead with doing a challenge study, and now the discussion is around the appropriate preparation of a challenge strain. These infections need to be controlled, so when you're inducing deliberately an infection, you need to know everything that you can about the challenge strain. So I'm anticipating before the trial, there will be a lot of time and effort making sure that the strain is very well characterized. And in the US, Professor Eyal can talk about it as well. There are people that are volunteering, saying that they want to take part in challenge trials because they recognize that this will accelerate vaccine production. When you have lots and lots and lots of vaccine candidates, how do you choose which ones to take forward? When we have more than 200 vaccine candidates being developed, we know that we cannot do 200 phase 3 trials. So how do you choose? I think that's something that is a question that could potentially, with a lot of caveats, be answered through human challenge studies.
Okay, definitely. Let me bring Professor Neer again here. Professor Neer, given the dilemma associated with human challenge studies and the stakes involved here as well, because we are in a race against time as far as COVID-19 pandemic is concerned, the number of deaths are going up every day in all parts of the world wherever this virus has been able to infect people, and that's most of the world now. Do you think that these guidelines which are in place are sufficient enough to navigate the researchers and scientists through this dilemma which they're facing right now?
think it's a very important question that you bring up. Is the social value, which is, I think, undeniable, of expediting vaccine development, ensuring it's not just the speed, it's also the certainty that you know that you will get enough cases of exposure to the virus to tell whether the vaccine works. It's not just an academic worry. It's the Oxford group is conducting a challenge trial, presumably precisely because in the spring, when they were conducting a conventional trial in the UK, what happened is that when they started the trial, there were many cases. There was a lot of community spread of the virus in the UK. And then, precisely because there was a public health scare, people became serious about self-isolation. Public health authorities became serious about discouraging interacting in public spaces without a mask, etc. And they didn't get enough cases for the study. They had to move to Brazil, South Africa, and the USA, and that's where they're working right now. For backup, they really want to do that. It's too important to rely on luck. And the same may recur in other conventional trials. So it's both the speed and the certainty of finishing, and there are also other distinctive things that one can learn scientifically from a challenge trial, such as about so-called correlates of protection and other questions for the development of a vaccine. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you are putting an individual at risk that they wouldn't have been at otherwise. That actually is something that occurs in conventional vaccine trials as well, where people might get injured from vaccine toxicity. It's a first-in-human substance in many cases. It may occur. There may be cases of so-called disease severity enhancement, a rare phenomenon which may happen nevertheless, where in the trial, and we would find them out in the trial before we move to the general public, but the vaccine can turn out to worsen the disease instead of ameliorating it. That could happen in any trial, and if there are thousands of volunteers and need for many cases of exposure, that increases these probabilities. So either trial type is risky, and okay. I believe that the guidelines that we have from WHO suggest that a human challenge trial is risky, but tolerably risky. The risks are commensurate, they seem to suggest, to the risks from practices such as live kidney donation, which carries risk. In 1 in 3,000 cases, the donor dies. There are also morbidities. But nobody would say is unacceptable. And the reason is that it's done when it's properly done with very, very high quality informed consent. We wouldn't accept kidney extraction without consent. And there are traumatic experiences in that respect in your country. And we accept it because it helps one individual. And in this case, we're talking about helping the world population.
Definitely, it is the community at large, which is whose benefit is at stake here, and this is a dilemma. Of course, as all of you are pointing out, risks involved as well. But then there are guidelines which will have to be adhered to, and perhaps a middle path to be resorted to here. But one more aspect of this entire discussion is equity of participation. Dr. Sanjay, I'd like to start with you on this aspect. How do we look at equity of participation in vaccine development? Because that's really, really important as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for bringing this issue. Because, one of the things that needs to be focused on in this whole effort of vaccine trials per se is the engagement of the stakeholders in this whole effort. What happens is some of the important trials in our country got a very major setback. One good example is of HPV vaccine, as you are aware. We had a problem, we had to withdraw it, and then it has been reintroduced now because of some of the bad, lack of communication that was there, and it led to certain kind of events. So in my view, engagement of the community, and here we do have to define community in the right way. Community is not necessarily the people who are going to receive it, but in addition to that, various kind of stakeholders like media, there are politicians, there are the physicians, the researchers, and so many other faces of the community that we see all around. All of these all of us, in fact, have a lot of access to information all around the world, but particularly on the internet. And so there are many people who are just there who probably are likely to spread information which is against this whole effort. So in my view, the credibility to this whole effort will come only if the people like us who are going to be involved in this effort in the long run are extremely accountable to people. And for that, it is really important that we are open about what we are doing at every step. Whatever are the steps that are being taken, what are the discussions that are happening at the level of the nation, at the level of policymakers, at the level of all those trial implementers, are absolutely clearly talked with people in media and in all other such forums where people can have reliable information on it. Because unless this gets done in a very clear way, there is every likelihood that there may be some kind of a problem that may happen. And anticipating that, we have to take appropriate measures that we are able to prevent such occurrences from happening. I think this is my first comment with respect to the community engagement. And when you talked about equity part of it, also, I suppose this is a discussion which is going to be an important one here. Now, who participates in clinical trials, who participates in human challenge studies, and who eventually are going to be the people who are going to receive vaccines on priority? Because all of us know vaccines are just not going to be available one day in the market, available for everybody. They are the country will have to eventually build the capacity for these particular vaccines, as Dr. Gagandeep pointed out earlier. The third point which he talked about, good quality vaccines in adequate amounts. Till that happens, who are the ones who are to be given this particular vaccine after they pass through all clinical trials? That these are the issues related to equity which we will have to deal with.
Okay, definitely. That's a very significant aspect of it, the delivery aspect, which would obviously demand a separate discussion altogether. But it's really, really important as far as we talk about equity participation. Dr. Kang, your views there, as Dr. Sanjay is saying, it involves, means ensuring the involvement of all stakeholders and also credible flow of credible information.
Absolutely. There's no question that this can only be done in institutions and by investigations that have the highest standards for clinical care and for credibility. This is not something that in India particularly we should be thinking about opening up the way we did BAB studies that are done by commercial enterprises. This should be in an academic setting with strong oversight from the regulators and ethicists to make sure that the processes are being followed. In fact, one of the things that I can speak to is that in this case, actually, people in Africa have done a better job than us. There are some clinical trials that have been done, challenge studies for malaria in Kenya, where the standards of social science, the engagement with the community, the making sure that communications are appropriate with all possible stakeholders have been done to such a high level that I think we should be learning from them rather than just learning from the West. But this is something that we do need to discuss and make sure that we do, but do it carefully, and so that nobody can question the credibility of the investigators, the findings, because it will be clear from the participants that they have been looked after as best as we can do.
Okay, great. Let's have concluding comments from Professor Neer here before we wind up the show on the equity of participation aspect, Professor Neer, and the way you see it there in the West as well as other areas. As Dr. Kang is pointing out, we can obviously learn from other nations and other regions as well, like Africa.
There are certainly things to learn from the experience. I totally agree with Dr. Kang on community engagement in Kenya in particular. On whom to recruit for the trials, I'll lay out, we're in the spirit of kind of openly discussing the complexities. It's a complex ethical issue, and it could go either way, and I'll just lay out the complexity and share with your audience. On the one hand, there is a drive in recent years to engage in trials, people from all walks of life, all minority groups, genders. There is a big movement to involve children in research, women in research, racial minorities in America in research more than they actually are currently involved. And on the other hand, this is sometimes cast as a matter of justice towards these populations, an opportunity to participate in this study, in this research. In this particular case, we are not talking about a therapeutic research that is helpful to the health of the participants. We are asking volunteers to do us a huge favor. It's akin to asking somebody for the huge favor of donating a kidney to you. So it's not a matter of my right to lose my kidney. There are reasons for the sake of similar subpopulations to want maybe their people to participate in the study, so that we are more confident that the findings are reflective of their needs. But it's complex. Do we want to focus on some of there are currently more than 32,000 people from around the world, from 140 countries, who have declared their will to participate in these studies. The initiators of this, it's called an organization called onedaysooner.org. You can find it on the internet. Okay. The initiators were graduates of some of the world's most prestigious academic institutions. And do we want people of that profile to participate, or do we want to reach out to the global poor? Maybe if we are offering this dangerous study participation to the global poor, it's exploitation. So it's a very fine balance. I think it's important to involve, it might be risky to involve, and this is something that the particular investigators and ethicists of a particular study will have to determine.
Okay. In fact, that also, turns out to be a very complex issue out here. Involves a lot of aspects. Thank you so much, Professor Neel, Dr. Gagandeep, Kang, and Dr. Sanjay, for sharing your views on these 2-3 important aspects as far as ethics of vaccine development is concerned. Obviously, it's a large issue. It's a huge issue with several other ramifications as well. We'll bring the other aspects like the delivery aspect of vaccine once it is ready in a separate show to our viewers. But so far, this is what is the experts' view as far as ethics of vaccine development is concerned. We'll come back again tomorrow with a different topic and different set of guests. Till then, you keep watching Rajya Sabha television, but please do not forget to ensure that you are wearing a face mask when you step out of your house, because this battle against COVID-19 is still underway. Thank you.